Welcome back. Now, among the Indian smartphone brands that have sprouted recently, we're seeing Xolo, we're seeing Micromax and Carb, and all of these rise to the top of the heap in sales numbers at least. But how do you get an Indian smartphone brand become a force to reckon with on an international stage? And what does it really take? To discuss this, Sunil Raina is joining us from Xolo, and we'll get an expert perspective from Amit Shahi of IdeaWorks as well. Great to have you with us. Sunil, you know, getting an international face on board is one route to take this on. Micromax has done it with Hugh Jackman. We were just talking about Tata Motors getting Messi on board now. What's the thought at Xolo to make this brand a global one? You've got Irfan Khan on board recently. What's the thought process in associating a big international face with a brand like Xolo?
See, apart from having an international face, which we have done, in fact, Irfan is also now an international face, so to speak. Prior to Irfan, we have done a tie-up with the Liverpool Football Club.
Yes.
The association with them is kind of giving it the global face, so to speak. I think more importantly, it's also about coming from an Indian brand perspective, which wants to make a mark on the global level. I think there is a lot more on the side of the technology that one has to really look at.
But,
so
you know, just that point about technology, of course, being very important. There's no taking away from that. And one argument that works in your favor on that count, from a technical point of view, really, is that your SoC, your system on a chip partners, they're diverse. Xolo 900 had the Intel chip, and Intel has advertised this quite heavily. All of this seems to point towards a strategy to hit as large a global market as possible. So, towards that end, what is the kind of push that you've made so far, and what's on the immediate horizon as well?
It was very important to first of all get your product right. So the only way to get the product right is to have the right kind of partnerships on the technology side. And also then to add it up, you have to have the international faces in terms of the celebrities or in terms of the associations that will do. I think we have done work in both these areas. One, on the side of the technology, because when you take products outside India and there is a certain expectation, there's a different level of competition altogether on the technology front. So you have to be ready for that. Apart from that, you also have to connect to the people in those countries. So therefore, you have to localize yourself. One of the things that we have done, what we are doing in Xolo is that we are creating a software platform which is called Hive. And that Hive allows us to do a lot of localization for the countries wherever we will go.
But let me bring in Amit on this. Amit, we started off by talking about, perception of a brand. And that largely today is being driven by the kind of faces associated with the brands that we are talking about. You're seeing that happen more and more, or are there alternate routes as well that are perhaps as effective, if not more?
No, one is seeing that definitely, and of course, as you mentioned earlier, the most recent one being Tata Motors signing up Messi. But coming from another perspective, which has dominated the kind of work that we've been doing, if you look at a brand and you also look at its country association.
Yes.
So I would feel that now with the large Make in India push that is happening over the past 1 year or so, Indian smartphone manufacturers or manufacturers of any other Indian products will benefit very heavily from this government push to establish greater credibility for the India brand.
Right.
This is something that we had been lacking in the past, and this is something that possibly Indian brands also stayed away from. Large expenditure in overseas markets.
Right.
In fact, a common refrain that one came across when one visited overseas conferences or even in places like Davos was that why are Indians so shy of telling the world what they are good at? So I guess that is all about to change.
Let me take that to Sunil for a moment, because I want to understand where this process started of being able to become a global brand.
There are two critical elements to going global or being a global player, so to speak. I think the first point is very important, the vision. So what vision do you have? So what is the larger purpose of existence that your brand or a company has? And second, and the most important one perhaps, is the innovation part of it.
Right.
I think there's a lot of scope out of this country for innovation. So we have not been a country where hardware innovation has really happened. Hardware innovation has mostly come from outside India. But the potential of doing innovation on the software front is very huge. In fact, bulk of the software innovation that the global brands are doing, it's all coming out of Bangalore or other parts of the country.
Right.
So therefore, we thought it could be a great idea to leverage this strength and therefore create a brand out of India which really stands for technology at the global scale.
Yeah, but you know, this perception game is a very hard one to crack. And Amit, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about this. You know, when it comes to perception, Indian products have never been thought of as top of the heap. To be able to bring that kind of innovation on a global platform, A, and then to ensure quality are, you know, two of these perception games that need to be won by Indian brands that are hoping to have a global market.
So both points are right. And, you know, when you speak of looking at a global market, I would suggest that, you know, new brands from India, perhaps brands like Sunil's, perhaps a brand like Xolo, there are a large number of new markets opening up in the world. You know, you look at Africa. And if you compare that with India, a brand like Xolo will find it very difficult to gain market share in India, which is already dominated by the Samsungs and the Apples of the world.
Correct.
Whereas if you go into a new market in Africa, where the mobile telephone market is redefining the entire economic space, there I feel there are greater opportunities. And if that is a market in which a brand from India can establish itself far more easily than other markets.
Right.
So one has to look at finding the right markets and playing the game right in those local markets as per their rules, and find a niche for oneself based on one's product offering or service offering.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll have to work a little differently in gaining market share globally.
Sure. So geographically speaking, Sunil, what's the strategy at Xolo right now?
Other than specifically talking about geographies, it's also important that you really define a segment of customers for yourself. There is this thing about how much can you really compete with already established players. But I think in terms of branding, in terms of brand building, if you really are able to identify a segment that you can really work for, I think then that gives you a leg up and you can really go out, not just domestic but also outside the country. There are such segments that exist. So what we are really working on is a space wherein there are two spaces, basically broader spaces. One is a space where there is low technology, low price, and then on the other side you have a high technology, high price space. And then there is a space that exists between the two. It is irrespective of the country, it's irrespective of the geography.
But when you're reaching out to a certain market, is there a level of standardization that you need to bring into a product? Amit, what is your take on this? Would you go with a standardized approach, or do you think that, you know, you need to customize your products?
Absolutely. I am one for product differentiation, and I don't believe much in standardization. More so, you know, to take the particular case of Africa. Now, Africa is 54 countries.
Yes.
We generally, people like to paint Africa with a single brush. But I know how different Africa can be, because we were running a program called India-Africa Shared Future for about 3 years, and we visited 37 African countries within the 5 or 6 of us who were traveling. The reality is, the ground realities in each of them was very, very different. The requirements were different. So I guess for a brand to penetrate into the rapidly growing African markets, a certain degree of product differentiation, and, you know, you'll need to think on your feet, adapt your product to the particular market. That's something that will definitely be required from mobile phone makers and others. And also, I believe that especially in markets like Africa, where India does enjoy a fairly high degree of credibility because of the historical relations and because of what we are currently doing by way of building capacity in the society, rather than just going there to make a quick buck from infrastructure development, trying to establish an Indian brand based on product differentiation will surely pay dividends.
Absolutely. So Sunil, I imagine that you're working on all of these things that Amit is pointing towards, and how do you think the government is really helping your cause to be able to take your brand to new shores?
I think government is very supportive, both for the domestic, the consumption that is happening of smartphones, as well as outside the country. We have not faced any hurdles on that front. In fact, there's a lot more encouragement from the government these days to really do more and more production out of India, which can therefore become the factory of the world, which is what's being talked about now.
Yes. Well, we'll be watching that space very closely, what Xolo does and what other brands like yours are also up to within that space. This is a discussion we're going to take ahead about the possibilities, the huge opportunities that exist for Indian brands to be able to reach out and be able to sell much more in global markets. How do they go about doing that? From a brand management perspective is something we'll talk about in future episodes of our show From Logo to Impact. But for the moment, Sunil and Amit, many thanks for joining us with your perspective. On that note, we'll take a little breather now on this edition of the show. Lots more coming up on the flip side.